are privileged to have with us today Apollo 15 Command Module Pilot, Al Worden. Welcome to Carlton Community High School and agreeing to do this interview. I'd like to start by asking you a few questions about your NASA career.
Sure, go ahead.
How did you become involved in the Apollo program, and in particular, how were you selected for Apollo 15?
Good question. There is a path, a career path that would lead to the space program and to the Apollo program. My career path was Air Force. I was a pilot. I actually taught in a test pilot school in America. I went through test pilot school here in England, the Empire Test Pilot School. I flew in the Air Force for a few years and then decided that it was time to go back to college, so I went back to college and got some master's degrees, and then went to test pilot school, became a test pilot instructor, and by the time I had all those qualifications, NASA was having a selection, and it was a rather easy choice for me to apply, and I got in. Now, I never thought about being an astronaut very much when I was growing up. That was not something that I even considered, because number one, when I was growing up, there were no astronauts, and number two, when I got old enough to be an astronaut, they weren't having any selections. Except that in December of 1960, December 1965, they did advertise for applicants for the program, and on a whim I put my name in and got in. But it was not something that I had a lifelong dream of going into space. It was kind of an extra special, it was icing on the cake for the career path that I'd picked.
What were your main objectives of Apollo 15, and how did these differ from the previous moon landings?
Apollo 15 was quite different from anything that had flown before. We carried, as an example, for the first time the lunar rover, which you see in the picture behind you. We also carried a scientific instrument module into lunar orbit, and in that module I had two large cameras. I had a number of remote sensing devices where I trained those sensing devices on the lunar surface, and we recorded in microwave, infrared, all alpha particle, gamma rays, that kind of thing. We had about 5 of those, and we recorded the response that we got from the lunar surface so that when they analyzed the rocks that were picked up on the moon, we could compare that with what we got in remote sensing, and they could develop a program then where we wouldn't have to go down and land anymore. So Apollo 15 was a much more scientific flight than any that had gone before us. In fact, the last year and a half of our training program, we really focused on the science that we're going to do more than on just flying to get there. So we were a very scientific flight, and we probably returned, in terms of the amount of scientific data that was collected on a flight, we did better. We brought back more than any flight.
Can you describe the experience of being launched into space aboard the Saturn V rocket?
Yeah, it's not what launching on a Saturn V is probably different from what people would think. It's not a big kick. It's a very, very slow departure. In fact, we didn't even know we were off the ground and on our way until the ground told us. They had to call us and say, "Okay, you're off the launch pad and you're on your way." So it's a very, very slow takeoff. The weight of the total launch vehicle was just a little less than the thrust that we had to get us off the ground. But as we burned out fuel, the weight was reduced, but the thrust remained the same. So we accelerated. And at the end of the first stage burnout, we were accelerating rather quickly. But it's a very soft takeoff. And it's kind of like, I always thought it was like if you drive a car and it's got an automatic transmission, you come to a stoplight. When the stoplight changes and you're ready to go, you just take your foot off the brake and the car will ease itself forward just based on the idling of the engine. And that's about how fast we took off. Very slow.
What made the biggest impression on you as you began to orbit the moon?
Biggest impression, once we got into orbit, I would guess, well, two things. One is seeing the moon up close is quite a shocker when you first see it. What we see from here, we see the really large features on the moon, but when you get up close to it, you see a lot of smaller ones, and that was kind of a shock. But the real, I guess the view that captured our attention the most was coming around the moon and seeing the Earth, and that's pretty spectacular. You look at the Earth and you say, boy, that's 250,000 miles away. I'm a long ways from home. And it's the only object out there that has color, and that's because we have an atmosphere that breaks up the sunlight into the various colors. The moon doesn't have it. None of the other planets around have that same thing. So the Earth is the only one in the solar system that has the range of colors that we have here, and it's pretty spectacular when you look back at it. And I guess those two things, seeing the moon up close and seeing the Earth rise over the far side of the moon, are the two things that are most impressive about going into orbit.
What were your duties in the command module as the rest of the crew explored the surface?
Basically, my duties in the command module were to fly the other two guys out to the moon, go into lunar orbit, help them get in the lunar module and down to the surface, stay in lunar orbit by myself, rendezvous and dock with them when they're finished on the surface, and then fly them all the way back home. So I did all the flying, basically, on the crew. The command module pilot gets the most flying time. The commander on a flight, he gets about 30 minutes worth, because he flies the lunar module down to the surface and then back up again, and that's about 30 minutes worth. But the other 290 hours are basically pilot time for the command module pilot. That was a great thing. I really enjoyed doing that.
Were you able to look back at the Earth from the moon, and did the Earth look small against the vastness of space?
Well, I spent a lot of time looking back at the Earth. It's a pretty phenomenal thing. I watched the Earth rise over the lunar horizon 75 times. And it's the most amazing thing you can see out there. From 250,000 miles, it doesn't look much bigger than the moon does from here. It's a pretty small object out there. So you get this feeling that, the Earth and the moon are pretty small objects when in the solar system. When you realize that the Earth is home, and I used to, in my mind, I'd think, I'd kind of visualize what the Earth looks like up close, and kind of zero in on Houston and my home and in my own mind. And that was kind of a little game that I played with myself. But looking at the whole Earth was just the most awesome sight you could have.
Did you have an entry into the Guinness Book of Records as the most isolated human being?
Yeah, I guess it's there. I'm not sure where they picked that up or why they got it or who decided that I was the one that would have that record, but all of the command module pilots were by themselves at one time or another during their flights, so I'm not the only one. I guess maybe I have that record in the books because I might have been in a higher orbit than the other guys. That's the only thing I can think. But yeah, it's there.
Can you explain the purpose of your EVA as Apollo 15 returned to Earth?
The extravehicular activity that I did on the way home was to recover, as I mentioned before, we had this scientific bay that I carried into lunar orbit, and in that were two cameras. One was a high-resolution camera, and the other was a mapping camera. The purpose of the spacewalk was to recover the film canisters that were attached to those cameras out there. So for like 40 minutes, I got outside and went back and got those canisters and brought them back in. That was kind of fun. It was pitch black. Couldn't see, unless I was looking directly at the sun or the Earth, couldn't see any. You can't see any. It's just absolutely black. But I did get a chance to stand up on the outside of the service module and kind of look around, and I could see the moon over here and the Earth over here, both at the same time, which is kind of a unique place to be. But that was fun. And I should add that we were so well trained to do that spacewalk that I did it too quickly, and I couldn't come up with an excuse to stay out there any longer, so I had to get back in at 38 minutes.
Can you describe the problem with the faulty parachute during splashdown?
Yeah, we lost a parachute on the way down. The main chutes came out at about 10,000 feet, and one of the chutes collapsed. It's the only time that happened. It was a technical issue. There was no surface wind when we came down. So we were coming straight down, and part of our procedure was to purge all the fuel that we had in the lines that we used for attitude control, little rockets around the spacecraft. And the fuel was a very, very toxic and very, very difficult fuel to work with, but it was also a fuel that would melt nylon. And what happened is when we purged that fuel out of the lines, it went straight up the risers in that parachute and got into the parachute and burned big holes in the parachute. And that's why we lost that chute. And they fixed a few things and took care of that problem, but that's the first time that it happened, and the only time it happened in the program. So we came down on 2 chutes, and the interesting thing is that that recovery system, when we land, was really designed for 2 chutes, and they put a 3rd one on as a safety factor, and we used up the safety factor that day.
Do you consider your mission with Apollo 15 to have been a life-changing experience?
Life-changing experience for Apollo 15? Not really. It was a wonderful thing to do. I've used that experience in my life to talk to other people, to talk to groups like you've got here. I think it's something that was a worthy goal in my life, and I've done a lot of things since then, but I don't think it was life-changing. I think I understand what you mean. Some of the fellows that were in the program became very religious after the flight. Some, like Ed Mitchell, got very involved and studied psychic phenomena because of the flight. I didn't have any experiences like that. To me, it was just a superb thing to do and to have in my life. But it was a lot of hard work and a lot of science and a lot of analysis and a lot of work getting ready for the flight, and then a lot of research and work after the flight. It was a great thing to do, but I don't really think it's changed my life.
Finally, many people regard the moon landings as one of the greatest achievements in human history. Are you disappointed that the latest program to land people on the moon has been cancelled? And do you think there is a future in manned space exploration?
I can give you my philosophy about that, which is that we're in a low point in the program right now. We're not doing much in space. We're only going to the International Space Station. And we're only doing that because the Russians have seats available for us to fly on their launch vehicles. NASA is working on a heavy booster. That'll be probably 10 years in the future. In my mind, there's no reason to go back to the moon, to send a man to the moon. There's nothing there for us that's of any value. The next flights should go to Mars. That may be 50 years in the future. It's going to take a long time to get everything ready. But you see, I believe that human beings have a genetic drive to go into space. And that is to preserve the species. If and when, not if, but when the sun burns through all the energy that we see every day, then the Earth won't be livable anymore. We're going to have to go somewhere else. And that might be a million years, it might be 10 million years, however long it takes. But when that time comes, we're going to have to be ready to go somewhere else. And there are planets out there that are livable, that have atmospheres that are just like what we have here. So there are places that we could go, but we got to, number one, figure out how to get there, and number two, how to find them. That may take a million years, but that's the direction we're going. So the space program has real value to us as human beings. Not just to explore someplace, but to find a place where we can live. And I do believe that's the direction that we're heading. I don't think we realize it because we put space exploration in our minds as exploring another planet, but we're continuing to go further and further out, and the day will come when we're going to go out far enough to find another planet, and then we'll have a place to go. That to me is the overriding purpose of the space program.
Once again, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the young people watching for sharing your thoughts and memories with us today.
Thank you, Ross. My pleasure to be here.